We're gonna get started here because we have a very special guest that came all the way from California to be here, and he's got a great a great couple of shows. I mean, our next guest does a show called the Solopreneur Hour. Who's heard of that? Solopreneur, yeah, all right, I know. And not just that, but also the Hines Ward Show. Who knows who Hines Ward is? Yeah, football player. Yeah, so I'm so happy Michael O'Neill came from California to be here. Everybody give him a hand. I was waiting for him to run down. I was like, oh, it looks like he's going to run down here. Thank you very much, man.
Thank you. Can I have one more mic? Can you grab me one that works?
Yeah.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. I want to first thank Joe for putting together an awesome event. Give a hand. He hasn't slept in like 6 months. Is this good? Is this on? We got it. Good. All right. The first thing we're going to do right now, before we do anything, is everyone grab that little piece, that little pad. Is that pad still around? Does anybody have the pad on their table? And just a pen. And I'm going to ask you quickly, if you wouldn't mind, to somebody raise your hand and give me the biggest takeaway you've had today so far. Anybody who's got a big takeaway? All right, so say your name and where you're from. Stand up. Say, but before this, we have rules to follow right here. If this person has a podcast, you are all required to write that podcast down on that pad and go subscribe to it. Okay? Can we make that agreement? All right. So, Jonathan.
John from DC.
All right, give him a hand. Go, John. What's your podcast, John?
My podcast is the Policy Viz podcast.
Policy Viz?
Yep. We're talking about data visualization, and open data.
Cool.
And
write that down, everybody.
And the other question was, what's
your biggest takeaway so far?
Know your avatar, know your audience.
Okay.
We should probably all know for everything, but
that's true.
Podcast especially. Right?
Yeah, you got to know your avatar. If you don't, think about it this way. When's the last time you spoke to a 23-year-old girl and a 45-year-old woman the same way? Right? So if someone goes, oh, my podcast is going to be 23 to 50-year-old women. Like, really? How? They're in a different universe. So who else has got one? So stand up, say your name, where you're from, and what your podcast is.
Okay.
Which one you want? Here you go.
Doesn't matter. Hi, everyone. I'm Erica Gordon. I'm from New Jersey. And Jersey's in the house. Burlington. So, exit... I don't know. Yeah. Exit 5 off the turnpike. So I thought you were talking about 295. I don't even know where I am right now. But, yeah. Thanks. My podcast is Moms with Dreams. And
Moms with Dreams. Write that down and subscribe.
Thank you. And my biggest takeaway today is just to be yourself. Like, sometimes I get caught up in, oh my gosh, I don't know if I want to say that, or am I going to offend someone? But just be yourself, and whoever's meant to hear you will follow and be with you because they like you for who you are, not who you're trying to be.
Give Eric a round of applause. Yeah, when we start shows and we look at people that we would consider influencers and say, oh man, they're super successful, they're on fire, if you will, we go, right? Well, that was good. Anyway, so the point is if anybody tries to clone John Lee Dumas's show, it's going to fail because they don't have the same background that John has. They're nowhere near as organized, and I'm very good friends with John. He will, like Will Smith, will be the last guy off the treadmill every time. John will outlast you, I promise. In fact, we did a Creative Live in San Francisco a couple of years ago. It was me, Greg Hickman, John, and Nick Unsworth. And the day before, we all decided to run the Golden Gate Bridge because we were like, let's go run back and forth. It's like 2 miles or something. And so I'm running with Nick, and John was in front of us like 3 feet. I go, dude, check this out. And I said, watch this. I can remote control John. So I ran like 2 feet in front of John, and John was like... and I did it again. And he just kept, and there was no way he was going to be second. So That's just who he is. Oh, can you go to the first slide? Cool. Yeah, let's go to the first one. Can you, yeah. I think it was set to the last one. That's probably why that happened. Here, I don't need this one now. Yeah, that's the last one. That was the giveaway that you weren't supposed to show till the very end. Well, who's got the wah, wah, wah? So, there it is. So, I'm a super nerd about studying interview and conversation. I love stand-up comedy. I'm very similar. Is it Jeff? Very similar to Jeff in that I don't listen to any entrepreneurial podcasts at all. The ones I listen to are Off Camera with Sam Jones. If you want to learn how to interview, holy Toledo. Off Camera with Sam Jones crushes interviews. Here's the thing with Alec Baldwin. And I was a guy that actually, when I was growing up, which happened to be here in Philly, we would be in rush hour traffic on the Schuylkill Expressway driving here, and Howard Stern would be on every radio that was in traffic, and he would say something funny, and you'd see every car laughing at the same time. And what's crazy is once you get beyond his shtick, you realize that he's the best interviewer of our generation. He's a guy that can crack anybody. And if you want to hear, to me, his most brilliant crack ever, there's a guy, this misogynistic jerk guy named Dan Bilzerian, who's on Instagram, if you know who he is. It's all about guns and girls and money. But this guy was a Navy SEAL, and he was a poker player, neither of which are known for their effusive storytelling. They're very close to the vest kind of guys. And everyone said to Howard, you got to interview this guy. He's got 8 million Instagram followers and girls all the time and guns and whatever. And so Howard had him on, and the dude was, he was as closed as you get as an interviewer. And I was on my bike. I was riding my bike in San Diego, and I'm listening to this show going, man, and because I love to study the external part of the interview, I'm watching this or listening to this dance that's happening where Howard's poking him in multiple ways, and he's not cracking anywhere. He's not giving him anything. And finally, 20 or so minutes in, I can't remember what he said exactly, but he found a weak spot. And because he's Howard, he just poured it on and cracked him. And all of a sudden, this guy starts telling stories. I was like, oh my God, that was a master class in how to crack a tight guest. And so my version of that, I'll get to that story. I have a lot to cover. So first of all, I coined a term called prodcasting. And I did that because a lot of us like to follow the most successful podcasters we know, especially in the entrepreneurial space. The problem with that is they've been doing it for like 2 years, and radio's been around for 85. There's actually a lot of tried and true practices of speaking into a microphone and communicating to an audience that happened way before podcasting was invented, but we seem to ignore most of that. So the first thing to think of is when you pick up a microphone and other people can hear it, you are a broadcaster. You are in the media. You can actually get into almost every conference you want to with a media pass. Try it. I've gone to the LA Auto Show, CES, conference after conference after conference for free because I'm in the media now. They actually take podcasting seriously. So when you hear about your favorite conferences and they cost $1,100 to go to, write to their media outlets and say, look, I've got a podcast. I've got thousands of listeners. You are in the media now. But don't forget that you're in the media now, which means that there's a responsibility to that. You have to be good at your craft, and this is a craft. I went to, right down the road, I went to Temple University and studied broadcasting, telecommunications, and mass media. And I didn't know it at the time. I was studying mostly the internet. I wish I'd maybe studied broadcasting. But people would go to school for 4 years to do what you can do now overnight with an iPhone and an ATR 2100. This is a real developed skill. So don't feel badly if you can't do it right away. It's like a thing. It's a challenge. You've got to learn how to communicate with people and listen and take the nuggets that they tell you and guide a story. And that's not easy. The other thing I want you to remember is no matter what you do or what your podcast is about, entertainment comes first. I'm going to say that again. You cannot be boring and try to have a podcast that's going to be successful. So even if you have a super data-driven show, think about your favorite teacher of all time and how you learned from that teacher. They told great stories. They were amazing. So if they're wrapping algebra up in some story where they're actually defining why algebra matters, like a rocket launch or something, I don't know why it would matter other than that, but that's neither here nor there. So they wrapped those things up in stories, and that's how you remember, wow, that teacher was so great. So no matter what the data is, you've got to wrap it up in a bit of a story. So when I first started my show, a lot of people wondered how I got Adam Carolla. So Adam Carolla was the Man Show. He did Love Line with Dr. Drew for a long time. He has obviously one of the most popular podcasts in history. And what I liked about him is that he has a real entrepreneurial hustle about him. He's a multi-New York Times bestselling author. He's put out 2 or 3 documentaries, 2 or 3 films that he's done himself. Obviously, the show has built a studio, has invested in podcasting. And I was like, man, this guy is the ultimate solopreneur. Like, that's what he does. Can you, Joe, are we able to move can you tilt the screen a bit so people can see all the social media stuff at the bottom of the thing, if you wouldn't mind, just to lift it a little. Put something under it. There you go. So people can see how to reach out to me. There you go. It's at Solo Hour on all of the tools. So they asked me, how did I get him? Well, I'm a huge fan of vintage cars. And what I know about Adam, because I listen to his show, is he's a huge fan of vintage cars. He has a bunch of Paul Newman's old race cars, and he likes to race them like at these great vintage events. And so he happened to be going to the Coronado Speed Festival, which is in San Diego. And I was like, I want to connect with this dude somehow. I'm going to make my way there. So I went there. I scouted it out. Ironically, his producer was wearing a Flyers hat. He was wearing a Philadelphia Flyers hat. And I saw him first. And I was like, oh, in. So I went and I had a chat with the producer for like 20 minutes. And so here's the first tip is, if you want to get good guests, you have to go to where good guests are. Meaning you're here at this conference. In fact, give yourself a round of applause for putting your own effort into being here, because it matters. It's how people connect. It's how people, when you get to these big conferences and you're able to say, hey, and have a quick conversation with someone and go, hey, would you be willing to be on my show? They go, yeah, totally. But if you had to go through their people, it's months and sometimes never to get on their show, right? So first, get to events. Second, third-party validation. So I had a conversation with this dude, this producer, and we chatted for a while. And then eventually I said, hey, I've got this podcast. It's for people that are exactly like Adam. He's a solopreneur. He's innovative. He's, making a huge impact in the space. Would you be willing to give me an introduction, right? And he goes, yeah, totally. So he walked over and said, Adam, this guy's got this, business podcast. He would love to have you on. And I'm like, all right, how long's the show? And I was like, well, it's like an hour. He's like, how about 25 minutes? I'm like, fine, whatever it is. And he ended up doing 45 on the show. But then it's there. It's like, I've got it, I thought the interview was great. It was fine. But forevermore, I will have had him on the show. So that's kind of a resume. Since then, when I meet someone and they go, what's the show? I go, well, I've had Adam Carolla on. And so you leverage that. You can leverage that. If you are at an event like this, I was at an event called Amplify a couple weeks ago in Vegas. There's a guy named Sean Stevenson who's in a wheelchair. A killer speaker. And the wheelchair disappears in about 30 seconds after he starts speaking. That's how good he is. And I was literally sitting directly across the table at lunch from him, and I didn't know him at all. He had just gotten done speaking. And my buddy Peter was to his right, to my left. And, it's lunchtime, so it's chaotic, and everyone's talking. And I said, Peter, would you mind introing me to Sean? Just kind of over the table. Would you mind introing me? And yeah. So he goes, hey, and then he introduces us. And that is so much more powerful than me saying, hey, hi, I've got a podcast, like 8 million people have downloaded it, or whatever thing you have to say that makes you feel weird because you feel like you're kind of bragging just to validate who you are. So that's one thing I'll teach you. In fact, when you go to a conference, I have can I pitch a free thing? I have a course called Conference-topia that's free. It's just conferencetopia.com that teaches you how to kind of conference better and be better at these kinds of things. But if you have a buddy and you meet someone at a conference that maybe is shy like you are, and you say, hey, let's kind of partner up on how we're going to do this the rest of this. We'll team up on this. I'll introduce you, you will introduce me. So you can walk up and say, John, I'd love you to meet my friend Joel. Joel has a great podcast called Relaunch. He's interviewed a lot of the big influencers, blah, blah, blah. So that person doesn't have to do all the heavy lifting themselves. You just get to be validated, and it feels better. So anyway, that's just a little tip outside of my little talk here. When we talk about the art of the interview, when someone comes on your show, especially when you're new, they're doing you a favor. You're trying to leverage their audience. So it's your only job to be an amazing host, first and foremost. And when I say host, I mean like a real host. Things that we've been watching for our whole lives in the media that we haven't connected to podcasting yet. And we're going to get to that when I talk about the intro. But we want that guest to feel coddled to and cared for the entire time. We want them to think, wow, this was so different than other podcasts I've done. I can't wait to A, share it, B, refer this person to my friends. So that's how you get good guests over and over and over again, is you get good at hosting and interviewing. That's how that works. So when I research my guests, which doesn't take long, it's 15 minutes max. I don't think I've ever done more than that for a show. My goal in my mind is if it's on their About page, we're not talking about it. Because that's already out there. All that's there. And we're going to talk about how to disarm them with their intro. But the next thing I do is I always go to YouTube to see if they've done any videos and see how to pronounce their name. Because the last thing you want to do is mispronounce their name, especially when they're live. And I run my show with no net. I have a Zoom H6, I hit record, and I hit stop, and whatever's in that hour is what the show is. I've never edited a podcast, not one time. And I do intros and live ad reads on the show. So I literally treat this as like the 60s, and I'm doing a live broadcast in front of a studio audience. But that makes me up my own game. It makes me really diligent in making sure that I hit all these points. So I always look also for anything interesting on social media. Do they coach their kids' softball team? Are they into mountain biking? Are they stand-up paddleboarder? Did they break their leg skiing? Like whatever it is, I try to find something. And I have I use Evernote, which is just a note-taking app on Mac OS. I think it's probably on PCs too. And it syncs between all your devices. It syncs on your computer. So as soon as you write it on your phone, it's on your computer as well. And I'll put the show number, I'll put the name of the person, then I'll put all of their relevant links first. What's their website? What's their Twitter? What's their, whatever. And anything, I start putting bullets down of things that I find interesting. Sometimes I will write questions. It's rare, but sometimes I have a few things that I'll actually want to ask them in the form of the conversation. And my whole show started because I had lunch with Pat Flynn, who had Smart Passive Income in San Diego, and we chatted for like 2 hours. And we talked about cars and men's fashion and girls and all things that dudes talk about when they sit for 2 hours. And we just had lunch. We were walking out the door, and he stopped and he goes, "Dude, thank you. I never get to do that." And I go, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Every time I have a conversation, it's about SPI. It's about Smart Passive Income. No one ever finds out the rest of my life." And I thought, wouldn't that be an interesting idea for a show? What if I brought these people on and talked around everything that they did, but it was a true conversation? So when these guys were on the panel earlier talking about, people writing questions down and then people submitting them prior, that's fine, but that's not what my show is. My show is a true conversation. And part of that, I've been interviewed now, I don't even know, a lot of times. For some reason, and I don't understand this, no one, not a single person has ever said, "Hey, do you mind? We don't know each other. Do you mind if we jump on video Skype for a second just to say hello?" Which I do with every single guest I have. So I have some context and background. I get to meet them for a second and go, "Hey, nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah." So we talk, and here's what I do during that time. I check my levels. So I'm a very firm believer in hardware over software. I don't do any software recording. I don't believe in it. When I was at the Super Bowl this year with Heinz and their team, I looked at what the media was doing, like the real media, the big-time 300 radio and television stations around the world covering that event. Almost every single one of them had an XLR microphone into a mixer, into a Zoom or Tascam recorder. None of them believed in recording to whatever software, because they only get Jerry Rice once. He's in and out. They only get, whatever celebrities pitching their stuff, and it's just not, for them, not there. I said, it's all right. For $500, I can get literally exactly what the pros use and sound like they do. So that's good enough for me. That's how I roll. But in the video hello, I check their levels. And again, another great reason to have a mixer is that you get to fix their crappy sound if they don't have a microphone. You also get to see where their microphone is or if they have one at all. Sometimes I see them talking like this, and they've got a $300 microphone. I'm like, dude, can you put your microphone close to your head so it can actually work the way it was designed? Or I'll say, hey, just out of curiosity, I see them in their iPhone headphones. I go, hey, do you happen to have a mic? And they're like, I got one right here. I'm like, can you plug it in so we can, wow, really? So that happens a lot. Probably 75% of the time, they've got an ATR 2100, a blue or something in a drawer next to them. So I always do that, do the sound levels, and I'll always ask them. By the way, we're on Skype, but I haven't hit record yet. To FYI, this is just this pre-recording, but we're connecting right now. I get to see their background because everything matters when you're doing an interview. I might see that they have a Batman figurine collection behind them or a bunch of hand pet drawings or something, which will always factor into my conversation, right? So you're looking for any little interesting edge to talk about because you're trying to open this guest up and get him to share awesome stories. So I say, okay, great to meet you. I'm going to hang up on you on video and call you back audio only. So here's another little interesting tidbit. If you call someone and go with the video, Skype apparently puts you into a video bandwidth channel, which is way busier and more crowded and more likely to drop. If you call them and stay audio only, it's a way less likely channel. It doesn't switch you into the video channel. So if you switch, don't just turn off the monitor, hang up and call them back audio only, and you should have a better, less dropping experience. So I fixed I plug my headphones into my Zoom, so I hear exactly what the SD card is hearing, which means that my post-production takes less than 5 minutes. I pull the SD card out, I put it into my computer, drag the MP3 file over, or the WAV, whatever I'm using, and then I'm exporting within 5 minutes. I don't do anything else. And that all happens because I've done the work ahead of time. Right? I've already got good sound in my ears before it gets into my Audacity. I use GarageBand, but whatever you want to use. Ask them at that point if they want to record a bumper. Like, hey, this is Gene Simmons, and you're listening to the Solopreneur Hour with Michael O'Neill. And then always ask them. This is the first part where they start feeling catered to. Hey, do you have a hard out? When do you have to go? Because I'm sure whether you've been the interviewer or interviewee, you've been like, oh, I got to pick my kid up in like 40 minutes. And all of a sudden your whole vibe changes, right? So sometimes, sometimes things get delayed and you don't start right on time. But I want them to think this person's really paying attention to what my needs are. So, hey, do you have a hard out? And go, all right, yeah, you got to go in 45. I'm going to set my alarm for 40. Make sure we have a smooth transition out the door. Next, the art of the intro. Does anybody who's not in my coaching group know what the last 2 words of any good intro are? I know you guys all know. You probably know. What are they? That's correct. You never utter their name before the last 2 words. And if you need more evidence of this, listen to any talk show in the history of talk shows and how they bring people on. If Jay Leno or any of the, literally anybody, they'll say something like, ladies and gentlemen, our next guest has won 5 Academy Awards. Their next project is a play in New York City on Broadway. It's The Lion King Live. Ladies and gentlemen, Brad Pitt, right? That's how they bring people on. They never say, Brad Pitt is our next guest, and then start going through accolades, because it went from being this great intro to now you're reading a resume. It has a totally different feel to it. And that is one of, to me, the super hacky modern podcast ways of bringing people on. Here's what you want to do. Anybody see 8 Mile by Eminem? Who raise your hands and tell me if you've seen 8 Mile. All right, so for those of you who haven't seen it, the very famous last scene has a rap battle going on between Eminem and, let's just call them the bad guys. What is it? Papa Doc. That's right, Papa Doc, right. And in a rap battle, as you all know, you never want to go first. It's just the bad spot, because then that other person can use whatever. He knows exactly where you are and then can rap around you. Well, what Eminem did, which was absolutely brilliant, is he called himself out on every problem that guy was going to bring up in his version of the rap battle. He said, yeah, I am white trash. My mom does sleep around. My girlfriend left me. And so by the time the second guy got to go, he had no more ammo. He was done. That's what you want to do with your guest. If you have someone that comes on and does their same spiel on everybody's show and their same narrative, take it away from them. Take it away in the intro. Do their spiel. My next guest was an architect, and he was laid off from his architect job. Then he decided to go into blah, blah, blah. Tell Pat Flynn's whole story before you say, ladies and gentlemen, Pat Flynn. Now Pat's got nothing else to say. He's got to be original and interesting on your show, right? You took his ammo away. So don't let them go through that narrative. You want to edify, edify, edify. You want to make them feel so good about being on your show. And then one of my other favorite little bits is, you are the Rosetta Stone. When I hear someone, and I hate to call anybody out on this. When I hear someone say, well, I've given them a little bit of the idea, why don't you tell the rest of the story? I'm like, could you be a hackier host? That is the hackiest way to bring someone on, because here's what you've just done. You've just given the keys to your kingdom to someone who doesn't know anything about your audience or what narrative you're trying to give them. They're just a guest. Like, they have no idea. So if you have a narrative in mind for a certain guest, and you know your audience really well because you've worked on your brand, you've worked on your avatar, you've built a relationship with these people, you want to make sure that whatever that guest says is translated correctly to your audience. You are the Rosetta Stone. You are the translator between your guest and the audience. So you have to make sure that, like, when you bring them on, instead of saying, tell the rest of the story, be very specific about their story. You went to Harvard in 1994. There was a big clash of blah, blah, blah. What was it like for you as a 21-year-old to be in the middle of that environment? Like, that's a rich question that they will then tell a story around. Versus, well, I did this, and then I went to Harvard, then I went to, like, they don't know what you want, so don't let them. You are ultimately in control of what your show does. So the next thing we want to do, which drives me crazy, this is another one of my biggest pet peeves, is think about this. Has anybody, just show of hands, has anybody ever not made it to the end of a podcast? Has anybody ever not made it to a podcast with most podcasts you listen to? Because that's, I listen to most of it, then something will happen, and then I'm out. Yet, for whatever reason, the trend in modern podcasting is to plug the guest at the very end of the show, where no one will hear who they are or where they are. So, you plug them at the beginning, middle, end of the show. So you say, ladies and gentlemen, Pat Flynn. Pat, so great to have you here. Oh, thanks so much, Mike. I appreciate it. SmartPassiveIncome.com is where you can find Pat. Also, the Ask Pat Show. It's Tuesdays and Thursdays on iTunes. So, Pat, blah, 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 right? You're in. That's what a pro does. That's what a real host of a show does. They don't leave them. And the other thing they don't do is go, tell people where to find you. Think about in real life how weird and awkward that feels when someone tells you to talk about yourself. Doesn't that feel weird? We want them to feel like, not only did this person pay attention to where I came from, I've already asked them ahead of time if they have anything they're trying to plug, because I did that previously. If they have anything special coming up, and it's up to you. I mean, you cannot do it enough. When you hit stop and they say, man, that was so cool that you kept promoting me throughout that episode, they're definitely going to refer you to their friends. They're definitely going to share. Plus, I'm going to totally hook you guys up with, like, everyone shares technique. I'll show you. Anyway, remember, they're doing you a favor for being on the show right now. So you got to take care of them. What I do is I always do beginning. I do it during a good point. If they make a good point on the show, and I'll say, hey, that was great. You guys tweet them at Solo Hour to tell them how great that was. That was an amazing point. So, and then I'll move on, right? And then what else? That's it for that. Oh, integration. I want to talk about integration really quick, which is instead of, you guys, does anybody know what Pretty Link is? It's a plugin for WordPress. It basically takes long URLs, kind of like Bitly does, and makes them short, but you can customize them. So I can say something like, just go to solohour.com/470 for today's show notes, right? And what's great about that is it makes it so much easier for people to remember who are mobile, they're running around. And you also can tell them, hey, do me a favor, guys, take your phone out of your pocket right now, as long as you're not driving, and go to this address. You can do that. And actually, it does increase conversions by doing it. It's crazy. Just tell them what to do. Ask for the sale. But the other integration thing is, if you're trying to send someone to a certain spot, I stole this from Pat Flynn, which is he was trying to get people to his Facebook fan page, and he bought patonfacebook.com and just sent them to his Facebook fan page that way, because it rolls off the tongue so much easier on a show. Yeah, just go to patonfacebook.com and that sends them to. So that's called integration. Remember that. Wait, did I skip that? Yes. You can't let the guest run rampant on your show. And sometimes they do, especially the author speaker types get into their agenda and they just go. At some point, it's okay for you to jump in and go, hey, let me see if I got that correctly. That kind of is a pattern interrupt for them. And then you repeat what they said, but the way your audience wants to hear it. And the next thing you can do is then you shift them. You can shift them away from their narrative. And I've had two very famous interviews, one with Michael Gerber, who wrote the E-Myth Revisited, who I started the show. Let's see where I started the show in my normal seated position, and I'm sitting with my microphone. I got the boom mic and stuff, and I'm talking. I couldn't wait. This guy changed my life. His book literally changed my life. This book, The E-Myth Revisited. And so I'm sitting there. I'm so excited. I had this big long intro for him. It was effusive. It was beautiful. It was like and I gave it. And I was thinking we'd talk for a couple minutes about like how big of a deal it was that he changes so many lives. So I go through this 2 minutes of just awesome intro. He just goes, thanks. Okay, so, and so that happened. I probably asked the first 3 questions. I always start off with like a non sequitur on my show, meaning I like to talk about something that has nothing to do with their business, because I want to get them telling stories and talking. So he shut me down time after time after time again in the first 5 minutes. It was just like this kind of Dan Bilzerian interview. So I went from being in my little seated position like this to within a minute and a half, I'm standing like I'm going to throw a punch. And I'm like, all right, dude, what's up? Let's go. And we spent an hour, battling. We spent an hour battling on the microphone. And I felt when I finished it, I thought, man, my feet were paddling pretty hard under the water, but I think I still looked like a swan on top. Like it still felt okay. But if you knew to listen, if you were kind of an interviewer nerd like I am, my buddy Chris Cerrone called me the day the show came out, 9 a.m. in the morning. It just come out. He just listened to it. And I pick up the phone, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? He goes, dude, Gerber. I was like, yeah, brutal show. And so that was him pushing my capability to just the very end. But I felt like I could handle it. The next one was this guy, Magnus Walker, who's this big car collector dude. And he just tells his story the way he tells it. And unfortunately, I was as sick as a dog. I was at his warehouse. I was so sick. He started telling his story. I kept trying to redirect him. And every time I redirected him, he would just be like, anyway, as I was saying, and he would just go back to, I was like, all right. And I was sick, and I was like, I don't have the strength for this. So go ahead, just tell your story, dude. And that's how it was. So you don't have to put up with that. It is your show. It's your audience. That guest doesn't have any idea what you're trying to accomplish, but you do. Be careful of author pitching, especially the ones that just wrote a book, and every other phrase is, well, in the book. And I'm like, all right, dude, we'll get to your book. I'm trying to find other things about it. Sometimes I've had to hit pause and go, I totally get it. we're gonna sell so many books in the second half hour of this show. But for right now, this is what I'm going for. I don't usually like to do that, but I did. I've done it in my life. So, asking the right questions. I got 5 minutes left ish. 7 minutes left. Great. No Q&A. I was hoping for a little Q&A, but 40 goes fast. I've never been accused of brevity. So, that's right. So, when you talk about how to actually ask a question to a guest, you guys probably know never yes or no. You're trying not to yes or no at all. But great ways to phrase questions. Tell me the story of the time. Or if you could identify the debate in your head, what was one side saying versus the other side? You're trying to create a storytelling atmosphere where they're getting their point across, but people continue to be entertained. Does that make sense? So I love the other one too, which is if the new you could talk to the old you, what would they say? What would this, and especially if there's a major transformation, why was this important to you? What is it's always in the follow-up. In sales, they say the fortune's in the follow-up, right? Right, used car guy? And if we do that move, I've literally said once on a podcast, and I'm not kidding about this, they were talking about this earlier, where someone, they've got questions written down, and they just go from question to question to question, right? I've said on someone's show, then my parents died in a space shuttle accident, and and I moved on, and they go, awesome. So I was like, I just said my parents died in a space shuttle accident. Really? Anyway, so what was the debate? Like, what was going on in your head? Everything you should think of as you're going through, even if you make a sticky note and put it on your monitor, talk in stories. You want them talking in stories. A good podcast interview is like a good therapy session. You want them to start spitting stuff out that they've never said before, and that's music to your ears. When they go, wow, I can't believe I told that story. I got Chris Ducker to do a Yoda impression. I got Amy Porterfield to talk about how she married her coworker's ex-husband. It's a whole thing. When you get it right, it's awesome. So that's how you feel awesome. Another big rookie mistake is not ejecting from your questions. Just because you wrote them down doesn't mean you have to say any of them. Right? I was just watching, what was I watching? Something yesterday or the day before. It wasn't Roaster. I don't forget what it was, but the guy said, I wrote a bunch of stuff down. I don't think I've gotten to one of them yet. Because sometimes the conversation's just great and it flows, right? This happened to me once. We had done an hour already. The show was great. We had this killer conversation of an hour. I'm like, cool, we'll wrap this thing up. This guy has a great show. It's great content. Then he goes, all right, we're going to go into the Thunderbolt round now, whatever it was. I was like, oh, no, not with the tornado round. And so he just decided to do his 6 questions, and we'd already answered 4 of them, during the content of the show. He just hadn't listened to what the words were. You know what I mean? It was just dude. So, total rookie mistake. Let the show flow. Let the show flow. And then don't try to crowbar them in, right? And then here's the little secret sauce for getting high-profile guests to share the show. And you may want to write this down specifically, or if not, I've got something for you after this. When you have done all these things, and I really had to fly through, but you get it. When you've done all these things and you hit stop and you go, man, we crushed that one. That was a good pod right there. They hopefully will say, that was great. That was an awesome experience I just had. And you say, it was for me too. Was it good for you? The 2 things that I do at that point are, I say, I know you're on these shows all the time, but you want them to do this when they're feeling great, right? They're feeling really good about your show. You say right then and there, hey, would you be willing to share this when the show comes out? And they're very rarely, I don't think I've ever even heard someone say no to this. And I say, great. And then I say, great, thank you so much. And also I say, who else do you think would be a good fit for this? Because this is your inside track to their inner circle. Who else do you think would be a good fit for this show? Because if they're an influencer, they have friends, and they're going to go, I just had an awesome experience. This guy's show was great. I had a great time on this show, right? So here's the kicker. Thank you so much. Blah, blah. Have a great day. You've already asked them. You've already said, would you be willing to share this show? And they've said yes. So you hang up. You fire them an email, maybe the next day, maybe the same day. And you say, hey, Mike, it was amazing having you on the show. And this is the key phrase. I really appreciate you promising to share the show when it comes out. I really appreciate you promising to share the show when it comes out. I know you don't have to do that, so I just wanted you to know I'm really grateful. So now that's there. Now that like you've now just committed them to this. Now it's their word at this point. When the show comes out, whenever that is, and I don't believe in a lot of lead time, I'll record a couple interviews today and they'll run next week because I like topical. When the show comes out, you just remind them again, hey, again, it was great having the show. I really appreciate that you're doing this, blah, blah, blah. And then you go, and they'll share it like 75, 80% of the time. Sometimes they won't. You can't, it's not their responsibility to share your show. They're under zero obligation to do that. But when they do, it's awesome. It is awesome. So I have a new, I don't know if this counts as a pitch, but I have a new course coming out called The Art of the Interview, which is way more in depth than this. I'm giving $100 off for anybody that wants to come from this. And this is how you can get it. It's solohour.com/mapcon. And I'll leave that open for a couple of days so you guys can jump on if you want to. If you don't, that's totally cool. You can also, if you want to just jump on my list or check the show out, text the word MapCon to 33444. Yeah. 33444. And that's all. That's all I've got for you guys. Thanks.
Woo! Give it out for Michael O'Neill.